Heading via Zoom to catch up with a contributor. He's been doing a lot of work for us over the last year or so. Investigative reporter Tom Ravlic. He's also an author and an academic with more than 22 years experience of reporting on politics and other matters. Tom, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me back again, George.
We've talked about a number of issues over the past year, but one that I didn't imagine we're going to be covering is the rise of white supremacy, not only around the world, but also in Australia. I thought we'd put this issue to bed quite some years ago, but clearly not.
No, look, we need to remember that Australia does have a history of white nationalism. We've had the White Australia policy in our history, so we've always had an undercurrent of people who are averse to those with a different skin colour or a different faith or anything that's different. Okay, so we've had that kicking around in our background for some time. What we've seen in recent years is an increase in the way in which people who hold these views, which typically assume to be minority views or fringe views, are able to connect with each other online, and you're seeing a greater proactivity amongst these characters domestically and internationally on encrypted apps and other particular programs, looking to recruit people, looking to provide ideological material, the texts that sort of advocate Nazism and other things, as well as using those technologies to organise activism and have communications that are hidden from law enforcement. So that's the biggest change that we've seen since you first came across people who've got a right-wing philosophy or right-wing bent many, many years ago.
Look, now that you put it like that, I can understand. There are so many carriers out there that have arrived on the scene, especially in the last half a dozen years, with encryption, both ends, making it very, very difficult for the authorities and others to monitor or even eavesdrop, as we once used to do with phones. So I suppose it's no surprise, but I am alarmed that only 2 years ago we had an Australian cross the Tasman, go to New Zealand and commit an unpardonable crime, and what made it worse was he recorded it live. He posted it live as it was happening across the world, and that shook us, and I suppose, as it should have, sent alarm bells through all these new social media platforms to rethink how they allow us to use the facilities. But the numbers is what surprises me. I'm hearing numbers now, and you and I have discussed this in the last few weeks. You're seeing a growth that is rather eerie and alarming.
Yes, let's go back about a fortnight, George, when a Current Affair ran the story on the National Socialist Network.
Yes.
It ran over 2 nights, and it is interesting to observe that what you saw was an account on Telegram associated with the National Socialist Network went from something like 5,008 is the exact number. It went to 6,500 or thereabouts.
We're talking followers. We're talking followers.
We're talking subscribers to a specific channel on Telegram, the encrypted app.
Yep.
So overnight there was at least 1,500 added, and then you go to the following day a similar number. So by the end of that week, this particular account affiliated with that group went from 5,008 well over 8,000. Now, you might say, well, 8,000 plus isn't a big number considering the Australian population, and that's possibly right because Telegram is an international application. I've got no doubt that researchers who are not neo-Nazis will be looking at that for their research material. Law enforcement would be on there, intelligence organisations would be on there, but there will also be people who've had, for some reason, cottoned on to getting an interest into this kind of material. What we need to be conscious of is that it's not so much that the numbers that are there; it's the fact that people are discovering places that offer this particular worldview, which does not accord with what we have in Australia, which is a multicultural policy, a policy where all races and all religions are welcome. Um, and that is where it creates a great deal of concern for policymakers, because these views are not only extreme, but they're also counter to a philosophy that is one about making people who have different views or different religions, who are of a different race or of a different ethnicity, welcome to this country. So that is what's happening, and you will have seen the proactivity of some of these guys are in and around universities where they'd put posters up, literally saying that Australia is for the white man, etc. And that would intimidate people who've come here from Asian countries to study. And that doesn't help Australia's reputation in the region.
So what do we do? What can we do when we talk about trying to not so much pull them back, but get them to reflect on the fact that their views are the extreme view, they're not the mainstream view, and no matter how much noise they make, they're the one that needs to do the pulling their head in, so to speak. What can governments do, whether it's state, whether it's federal? What can they do, and what can police and other authorities do to keep a check on people like this who have views that not only are outdated, but are so far from the norm that they do hurt and cause enormous alarm?
There are several things that people can do, one of which is that all law enforcement and security agencies can monitor individuals and keep individuals on a watch list, which is fine. They do that already, as I understand it. They've done that for years with a range of individuals on the far right and people who have involvement in this sort of Islamist type activism around domestically and around the globe. So that's already being done. The government can look more closely at the way in which the legal system works and how certain things are promoted by these organisations. For example, there was a recent Victorian law passed that prohibited the public unveiling of, or the public use of, things like the swastika, right?
Right.
So that then starts to put a societal imprimatur on banning extremist symbols from being displayed. The other thing that we need to be careful of, and I know there's a very active debate on whether you platform people who have extreme views in the media or elsewhere. One of the things we need to be conscious of is there are times we need to expose people judiciously to a particular view and then provide material that counters that view in news and current affairs reporting. So while I do have some sympathy with the platforms that have deplatformed right-wing extremists from, say, Facebook and Twitter, that is a good, that minimises their audience. But in reporting, that is in the journalistic world, we need to be conscious of the fact that we need to report the world as it is. That there ain't no rose garden, George, that comes without its thorns. So we need to be prepared to report the world in all of its ugliness, so people understand that these views are not views that are held commonly. These are the counter perspectives. These are the real results of those views, as we've seen over history and over time.
It never ceases to amaze me that whenever there is turmoil, whenever there's disruption, And we heard the word chaos last year. You and I spoke about it and some of the challenges. We saw some of the imagery coming out of the American election, both pre the election and then during the election, and of course post the election, when we saw the attack on the Capitol building. That was ugly, that was hideous stuff, but it was also very clear to those of us who were watching that they were coordinated, and they were certainly very, very
Yes.
secure in what they wanted to do, and they got it done. And that was disturbing. What it showed me just how unprepared the policing system at the Capitol, which should be one of the best and most secure places in America, it wasn't.
I think there are several points that are useful to make looking at the Capitol attack on January 6th. The first is we've got commentators still to this day on television channels blaming Antifa, that is sort of anarchist activists, for what happened. It's clear from the evidence that has been presented by the FBI, both to Congress and more generally, that the groups involved in the January 6th insurrection were not Antifa. It's quite clear that groups like the Three Percenters, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and people who adhere to Quanon kookyism were the ones that were involved up to their eyeballs, up to their necks in all of this. And the problem I've got with the way in which some of our commentators domestically deal with this issue is that they're being disingenuous, because if they agreed that the far right was responsible for the violence, and that may reflect poorly on the person they deeply wanted to stay in the White House, that is Donald Trump. It's a disgrace.
Look, I again applaud you and thank you very much for joining us and for casting some light on a problem that we need to attend to. We can't let it just run its own race. We have a multicultural community that we need to look after and protect. And as we've seen over the years, we need to speak up, we need to be more proactive, and we need to remind all our lawmakers that this is the Australia we want to pursue, and no other face of Australia will suit any of us.
Thanks for having me again, George, and to you and your viewers, have a great day.
Thank you, my boy. Tom Ravlic joining us. As I said, an author and a journalist, investigative journalist for the better part of 22 years, giving us some insight into some of the challenges and some of the problems that are going on behind the scenes that we're not necessarily privy to.